My name is Jintara. I served as the ambassador of the Jodani to the United Galactic Council for 85 Galactic Standard years, an impressive feat considering the average Jodani only lives to 110. In that time, I experienced the Council's first contact with over a dozen different species: the Hadar, Kel, Manil, Fintan, and many others. However, the most notable by far was obviously humanity. First contact with them was interesting, yet at the same time mundane. A Kinar freighter had become critically damaged due to a pirate attack. Despite the risk, the captain ordered an FTL course to the nearest known inhabited system. Due to the damage, their drive eventually failed. They dropped out of warp and were left drifting just within the orbit of the dwarf planet we'd later come to find out was called Pluto. While they tried to repair their drive, their remaining operational sensors alerted them to the approach of 7 unknown vessels. Being completely defenseless and not knowing which species the ships belonged to, they broadcasted a message of unconditional surrender in the language of binary. It had become the most basic form of communication since so far it seemed to be universal. Though once first contact was over, the use of Galactic Basic was heavily encouraged, though not required. It was believed even the most violent species would accept an unconditional surrender, since a ship not destroyed was a ship worth salvage, loot, and possibly ransom for its crew. Plus, you could always blow it up later after taking everything of value. To their surprise, the ships stopped almost immediately. They sat unmoving for what seemed like an eternity, their sublight engines idling and their primary weapon systems readied but untargeted. 2 of the ships were different in that they had no detectable weapons of any kind. The Kinar were then even more surprised when their sensors told them the unknown ships were powering down their weapons. Their communications array received a return message in binary: your ship seems crippled. Do you require assistance? That was the first interaction between the UGC and humanity. The 2 ships without weapons were a ship dedicated solely to repairing other ships, and what the humans called a hospital ship, a vessel whose primary purpose was to render longer-term medical aid than what might be capable in a ship's sickbay, and thus carried no weapons as a sign of its non-combatant status. After the freighter was repaired, the Kinar and humans exchanged the things typical of species who experience peaceful first contact: information about each other, what they knew of the wider galaxy, more sophisticated ways of communicating, and cultural exchanges. Overall, it was a pleasant, if unremarkable, first contact. Soon, human dignitaries met with the wider council. They seemed like most other peaceable species, amicable, eager to learn about the species of the council, and open to diplomacy. Their initial approach to the Kinar vessel with weapons ready was understandable, and wasn't taken as a sign they would be one of the more warlike species like the Ned, Tier AR, or Aaron. They were encountering an unknown alien people for the first time, and had to be ready for anything. In fact, they were lauded for not only sending warships to investigate the unknown intruders, but also aid vessels, despite not knowing the intentions of the ship. After much discussion, debate, and negotiation, they were offered and accepted membership in the council. For a while, it seemed like nothing had really changed in the galaxy. The human system quickly became a center of commerce and industry. They had a knack for making friends, trading, and building. They were always willing to make compromises, and it served them well. They also had an explorative spirit that caused them to expand rapidly. They were lucky in that virtually all of the systems in what they called the local bubble, a region, roughly 300 light-years in diameter centered around their system star, were not claimed by any other species. So they were able to rapidly expand, and before long they had claimed the region for themselves. Their direct control was felt on over 300 planets and tens of thousands of asteroids, albeit the vast majority of them were simple mining, trade, and supply outposts, with a smaller amount of military outposts to protect them. Pretty much all of their more hostile encounters led to them making concessions with their enemies. Once, a small species called the Thene, located on the edge of human space, invaded the nearest human system, claiming that they had a centuries-old claim on it. They destroyed the military outposts protecting the civilian ones and basically dared them to take them back. Surprisingly, the humans refused the provocation and, through the UGC, had peace arbitrated. In return for the system, the humans not only forgave them for their hostile actions but even granted them limited rights to the resources from the system, as well as decently sized financial aid. Another time, a group of kill terrorists took a human city on the planet of Ava hostage, threatening to level the city with a stolen nuclear warhead. In return for not glassing the city, the terrorists wanted the release of another coral terrorist cell that had been captured by the Milia, a species that had had little interaction with humanity, and what little they had been less than pleasant. To many, the humans seemed to be in a tricky spot. They had 50 million people with a nuclear gun to their heads. And their only two options seemed to be to try and free them with direct military action that might result in nuclear annihilation, or try and negotiate the release of terrorists from a species they hadn't had much cordial interaction with, which would set a dangerous precedent. To most people's surprise, the humans poured all of their charisma and negotiating skills into convincing the Milia to give them the people the terrorists wanted released. They managed it, but at a heavy cost over 5 trillion galactic monetary units worth of resources. They provided discounts and direct financial aid. In the end, they were able to satisfy the terrorists and regain control of the city. It was not a complete disaster. The humans were able to track most of the terrorist ships as they left the system, and with the aid of the coral Milia and a couple of other species, most of the terrorists were recaptured or killed. But the thing most species took note of from these incidents was the lengths humanity would go to avoid using their military in seemingly even the most desperate of situations. This brings me to a topic many at the time didn't think of when discussing humans their military. They had, of course, undergone various exchanges of military-related technology and such, but it had never seemed like their strong suit. They were as competent at fighting as most were, and their equipment was even considered largely inferior due to the fact that their weapons were mostly still ballistics-based, using chemical propellants to accelerate bits of metal to high velocity. The main exception was their warships, which used a combination of railguns and missiles. Overall, the few that took a major interest in humanity's warfighting ability largely concluded that had one of the major warlike species, like the Ire I mentioned before, decided they wanted to make humanity subservient to them, like they had several species already. The humans would put up a decent fight but be overrun relatively quickly. It was deemed they just didn't have the capacity, spirit, or will to fight a large, prolonged, multi-system war. Gods, I wish they had never needed to be proven wrong. The shattering of the galaxy-wide illusion that humanity were pushovers ended a mere 5 years after the terrorist incident on Ava. The humans shared a border with the Hadai, the largest of the warlike species in the UGC. They were bipedal mammals like the humans' 2 arms, 2 legs, an average height of about 6 Earth feet, and an average weight of 200 Earth pounds, though they did have much thicker hair on their arms and legs than humans due to their planet being slightly colder on average than Earth. Human relations with them had been both hot and cold. Initially, the Hadai didn't much care about humanity one way or another. As they became the mercantile powerhouse they were largely known as at the time, relations warmed up as human goods started entering the Hadai economy. But once human control had expanded to their borders, they became increasingly hostile to humanity. The Hadai had grown used to controlling the largest amount of territory of any UGC species, but it seemed they were growing worried about no longer being, as the humans would say, the biggest fish in the pond. Humanity tried its usual tactics of generous offers and concessions, but no matter how much they gave up or gifted, the Hadai always wanted more. The final straw came when the Hadai military crossed the border and took an entire cluster known by the humans as Hyades. Hyades contained over 1/3 of humanity's habitable worlds and produced the majority of their thallium, gallium, and yttrium. When their own charisma failed, they turned to the Council for arbitration. Over the years, I had grown fond of the humans, as many of my people had, and made a point to become good friends with every human ambassador that had come along. During this crisis, the human ambassador was a female named Alexandra Hansen. She was the youngest human ambassador so far, having been assigned the position at 30 human years old, though she was now 35. I must admit, I did find myself fancying her more than I did most human females. Something about her I found very attractive, something aside from her physical appearance, which was already very easy on the eyes. We're still not quite sure why, but Jodani and humans can intermate with each other, so while it wasn't common, some Jodani and humans entered relationships and had children. It probably helped that we look almost identical to humans, aside from our skin coming in many more colors. For example, my skin is a light red. I'm told humans call it coral red. Anyhow, I also must confess that I had considered possibly trying to take my friendship with Alexandra or ally to her friends further. But after much consideration, I decided that, since it would basically force us out of our jobs for obvious reasons, it was best to leave things at a very friendly, though professional level. Not to mention I was twice her age, which, while not an uncommon thing for Jodani, was generally frowned upon by humans. Anyway, when Ali had come to me while preparations for the arbitration were underway, I was curious. She knew that I was part of the committee that dealt with arbitrations, and as such, coming to me mere hours before the first meeting was to occur would look very much like she was trying to influence me. It was when I saw the look on her face that I knew why she had come. She was scared. "Thanks for meeting with me, Ambassador Gara," she said. I chuckled. She was always so formal. "Please, ally, you know you can just call me Genta." I was glad to see her smile, even if only for a moment. I know, just the force of habit, I guess. You know I always stay formal when I'm meeting others as the human ambassador, so I get used to it. Anyways, I guess you know why I'm here. Yes, I imagined you might want to talk about the arbitration, though I am curious why you would take the risk of being seen as trying to influence my decision by coming to me in the council building. Ally sighed as she sat down and reached for the bottle of alcohol I kept around just for her visits. It was a bottle of something the humans called Jack Daniels. She poured herself an ounce or so before gulping it down and pouring a full drink. "It is about the arbitration, but definitely not to influence you. In fact, I'm really not even here as the human ambassador. I'm just here as a human who is scared for what the future might hold." I honestly couldn't tell if she was trying some kind of strange psychological tactic for some reason. In our time as friends, I had never seen her worried about anything. Even during the time of the Eva crisis, when she had only been the ambassador for a few months, she showed both the public and me nothing but cool and calm. Then again, I also suppose I could see how this crisis far dwarfed that of one that concerned only a single city. I thought that perhaps those who believed humanity was weak were right, and she was worried that if things didn't go humanity's way, this would be the start of their subjugation. I carefully thought my words over before speaking. "Ally, if you're worried that the Hedai might prevail in the arbitration and use it as a stepping stone to a full annexation, I believe I can assure you that the Jodani—" She cut me off with a shake of her head. "No, my friend, it's not that I'm worried about. No, I'm here because I'm worried that the Hedai won't see reason and at least work with us for a more amicable solution to this problem. That they'll force our hand." I was now thoroughly puzzled. "What do you mean by force your hand?" Ally chuckled, before taking another sip of her drink. "Genta, I and the rest of my race are well aware of the rest of the galaxy's view on humanity, that we're weak and can't defend ourselves. I obviously can't go into details, but between us I can assure you that's far from the truth. We don't avoid war because we can't wage it. We avoid war because war is nothing but suffering and misery incarnate. It never brings anything good. I believe you are familiar with the Christian concept of hell. It took me a moment, but I remembered when I learned about the religion humans call Christianity. Yes, hell is believed to be the place or state into which, by God's definitive judgment, unrepentant sinners pass in judgment. It has been described as a place of perpetual conscious torment, both physical and spiritual, with much emphasis placed on fire, burning, and unquenchable thirst. She nodded. That is the majority opinion nowadays, though as with any religion, there are many different beliefs. Anyway, my people have a saying. It originates from a time when humanity was just starting to experience what industrialized war was like, where death came quick, without warning, and en masse. She finished the rest of her drink in one gulp. "War is hell." She poured herself yet another drink, which caused me to start to get worried. She had to take part in the arbitration soon, but this was her third drink in just 10 minutes, and she obviously knew being drunk was not a good state to be in when dealing with sensitive issues. Personally, I cannot disagree. While I have not obviously experienced war firsthand, from my training while I was in the military, I was subjected to virtual recreations with audio, visuals, and physical sensations of the wars from before my people took to the stars, to prepare my mind for what war would be like. Her face became dark for a moment before returning to its so far almost constant look of depression. I won't discuss them, but needless to say, they dwarf just about anything any other race has seen from what I've read. My thoughts drifted back to my learning of my own people's wars, both internal and after we'd taken to space. The Jodani had quickly learned that there was more to be gained by cooperation than by force. Our worst was our one worldwide war, and the hundreds of thousands killed convinced us there had to be a better way. Thankfully, we have still been able to defend ourselves, having done so on several occasions, and no other species has yet to deem us worth the trouble of fully conquering. The worst war one could think of was by far the Ned Tyr Finton War. Having lasted 4 years, it had cost around 200 million dead and crippled both species for years. I collected my thoughts and returned to the conversation. "So why is it you're here, ally? Are you simply looking for assurances all will be fine?" She shook her head. "Not really, though they'd be nice. I'm here to ask not as the human ambassador, but as just a normal human, that you and the arbitration committee do everything you can to get the Hedai to work with us. As you can imagine, they can't have the entire cluster, but you also know that we're more than open to almost anything below. That I gave her my best reassuring smile. I assure you, Ally, that we'll get things set right. Ally smiled again, though this one was much more somber than her last one. I hope so, Genta. I hope with every fiber of my being that the thing my people fear the most does not come to pass. My interest was piqued. If I may ask, what is this thing your people fear the most? She looked to her right, out a window at the lush gardens below that held plants from every UGC world. Before looking back to me, the look on her face somehow more somber and dark than it ever had been before. When good men go to war, the first arbitration meeting began, and I could tell almost from those first minutes that things weren't going to go well. The Hadai had always been hard-headed, but they seemed unwilling to make even the smallest concessions. The view that humanity was weak had seemingly been hardwired into the Hadai ambassador's brain. At first we tried getting him to see that war wouldn't serve them any purpose, but the ambassador countered by claiming that it obviously would, with the resources of an entire star cluster being more than worth a little trouble. Then we tried explaining that a full-out war between species would be more than a little trouble, citing the Ned Tier-Finton War. He retorted that humanity would never be able to put up as much of a fight as either of those species had. In this regard, humanity's so far peaceful and concession-laden path gave us little we could argue with. An overall view of species militaries was generally information that was public knowledge, and with what was publicly available, the humans did definitely seem to be the weaker of the two species. Their navy was only a third the size of the Hadai's, with their groundside forces being half. They controlled roughly the same amount of planets and outposts, but whereas the Hadai had a military outpost for every civilian one, humanity only had about one military for every 4 civilian. With that in mind, I suppose I can't blame people at the time for thinking they were weak. Gods, I wish the humans had been more open with their history back then. Maybe we could have been more persuasive. Anyway, we then tried to get him to budge with promises of resources and financial aid from several other species, including the Jodani, that when coupled with some human concessions would result in them getting a majority of the value they'd get from controlling the star cluster. Again, he reiterated that they wouldn't need to settle for less value than they'd get from the cluster, since they'd easily be able to defeat the humans should they refuse to relinquish claim over the cluster. After nearly an entire day of talks, a recess till the next day was called, and I returned to my office after some discussions with the other committee members. To my surprise and slight discomfort, I found the Hadai ambassador, a male called Hayan, sitting on the chair in front of my desk, facing away from the door. He was sipping on a drink, probably that disgusting Madone swill that was supposedly wine. "Ah, Ambassador Gara, I was hoping to catch you before you prepared to leave." I sat down at my desk and did my best to be courteous and professional, even though after an entire day of chest-thumping, grandiose claims, and stubbornness, I was not in the mood for him. "Ambassador you know you should not be here," it might give the impression he laughed, which merely irritated me more. "Mr. Gara, I'm not here to influence you. These arbitration meetings are pointless. We are not giving up the star cluster. We have no need to. The only thing that could tempt us is a larger prize, a prize which we know the humans do not have, and that the rest of the UGC will not be willing to give up. Even if the humans did try and resist, our superior military forces would defeat theirs within a few months. In that case, we would win an even greater prize than the one they tried to deny us." He took another sip from his drink. "Their entire Dominion Empire." "Empire," said a voice from behind him. Hayan turned in his seat, and I leaned over to see around him. I always did hate that my office had a chair directly between me and the door, leaving me unable to see past it when someone sat in it. From the voice, though, I knew it was Ally. "I'm sorry, Miss Hansen. I wasn't aware that the humans considered themselves rulers of an empire," Hayan said, through a smirk. Ally walked forward slightly. "First, it's Ambassador Hansen. Second, if you didn't know we were an empire, then you're a terrible ambassador. It's in our name, the United Earth Empire. Though we haven't been a true empire since long before first contact, we've kept the name because honestly, it just sounds cool." I stood up from my seat and moved to stand between them, but at a respectable distance away. "Ambassador Hansen," I started, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Ally glanced at me but returned her glare to Hayan before replying. "Ambassador Gara, I'm glad you're here. Maybe you can help me privately convince Ambassador to finally see sense." Hayan angrily sighed and didn't even look at her while he spoke. "I guess you weren't listening during that entire pointless meeting, and I don't know how much you heard of our conversation, but let me reiterate, the Hadai will not give up what they have taken. If humanity wants Star Cluster 76 GF back, They will have to fight us for it, a fight they can't win. For the first time since I'd known her, I saw Ally's face turn to a look of annoyance, not the kind of annoyance you get while trying to solve a difficult problem, but the kind of annoyance one would show when they were tired of someone's actions. She took another 2 steps toward Hayan, who actually lifted an eyebrow and curtly said, "This might be your last chance. Agree to actually take the arbitration seriously and work with us, or our hand will be forced, and you and your entire people will not like the outcome." Hayan took in what she had said for a moment before laughing. "Your hand will be forced. Please. Your people have shown nothing but cowardice since they showed up on the—" He was cut off by Ally taking the remaining 3 steps to his chair rapidly and clamping her hands down violently on the chair's armrests, leaning her face to within just a few inches of Hayan's. Her face had snapped from annoyed to visibly angered within an instant. I was taken aback. I had never seen a human angry and had almost come to believe humans, especially Ally, couldn't even physically get angry, despite how silly the notion was. But I also sensed something that completely contrasted with the anger I was seeing: desperation. You people are toying with something you do not understand. You think we are weak? Why? Because we do not use force at the smallest inconvenience. Because we do not resort to our baser instincts at the slightest provocation. No, where you see weakness we see strength, where you see timidity we see composure. You really think that we've only shown cowardice? If you do, you are truly simple-minded. Cowardice? No, we've shown nothing but restraint and discipline. We have suppressed our baser instincts for the good of all mankind and all our friends in the galaxy. But if you keep on your current path, then we will have no choice but to cast off our inhibitions to embrace the cold, calculated, unrelenting, anguished rage that sleeps deep within every human being's very soul. I urge you, Ambassador Eir, turn back now. Alter the Hadai's course before it drives them into complete and utter annihilation. Both me and Hayan were frozen in place. I never imagined any human could ever have put on the display I just witnessed, and I could tell Hayan was thinking the same. The room stayed silent for a while, until Hayan seemingly managed to work up something resembling confidence. He stood, and Ally backed off but kept her face within inches of his well, as close as she could with him being about a head taller than her. Ambassador Hansen, that was quite the display. It saddens me that you would resort to such things in order to try and intimidate me into making a decision that goes against what's best for my people. I have other business to attend to. So I will take my leave. Do please try and calm yourself for tomorrow's meeting. With that, he walked around Ally, who turned in place, and watched him as he walked out of my office. Once the door was closed, Ally appeared to have at least a breath she didn't know she was holding. She backed up and sat down in the chair, putting her head in her hands. I was unsure of how to proceed, and as I tried to decide, Ally reached for the bottle of Jack Daniels beside the chair, and to my surprise, simply removed the cap and took 2 big gulps straight from the bottle before setting it down and taking in a deep breath before shakily exhaling it. "There's no stopping it now," she said. I walked over to her and knelt so my head would be level with hers. Stopping what I asked? She turned to look at me, and I was again taken aback as I saw her eyes were full of tears. Armageddon the next day is one that has forever been etched into the fabric of galactic history. It was supposed to be the 2nd day of arbitrations. Everyone I've ever known that was alive that day, human or otherwise, wishes that's all it had been. Once everyone had filed into the council chambers, the meeting began almost immediately. Ally stood up and walked to the speaking circle that lay before the committee's elevated podium. She was looking like her old self, but something was off. She was different somehow, I couldn't quite tell how. "Good morning, everybody," she started. "I know that today's schedule has fully been set aside for the expected negotiations. Sadly, I do not believe that will be necessary. I have brought with me my people's most recent and by far most generous offer. However, it is also our final one. This is the ultimatum, the last chance to avoid a full-blown calamity that got the committee's attention, as well as the rest of the chambers. See, while these arbitrations were handled by a select committee, it had also been written that the entire council. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.